The council chamber stretched for nearly a kilometer in every direction, its ceiling lost somewhere in the engineered clouds that drifted through the upper atmosphere of Station Prime. Thousands of seats rose in gentle tiers around a central speaking platform, each section reserved for a different member species of the Galactic Council. Today, perhaps 100 delegates had bothered to attend. The agenda promised nothing exciting: routine business, budget allocations, and one small item at the very end: the preliminary review of an application from a newly spacefaring species. And of the delegation settled into his seat and allowed his secondary eyelids to slide closed. He had served on the council for 300 years, and he had seen this process play out dozens of times. A new species would emerge from some quiet corner of the galaxy, having finally discovered faster-than-light travel. Their file would be reviewed. Their biology would be assessed. Their history would be examined for any signs of instability. And then, assuming they met the basic requirements for civilized behavior, they would be granted provisional membership and assigned a mentor species to guide them through their first few centuries of galactic citizenship. It was, in N's experience, deeply boring work. The representative from the hegemony was droning on about shipping lane regulations when N's assistant leaned close to his ear. "The new species file has been uploaded to your terminal, Sol system, planet designation Earth," and waved a dismissive tendril. "I'll review it during the recess." "I think you should review it now, sir." Something in his assistant's voice made him open his primary eyes. The young skin had gone pale, shifting from its usual deep blue to an unsettling gray, and had seen that coloration before, during the border conflicts of his youth. It was the color of fear. He pulled up the file on his personal terminal and began to read. The first page contained basic astronomical data. Sol system, 8 planets, one of which supported life. Standard oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere, nothing unusual there. He scrolled to the biological specifications of the applicant species and felt his own skin begin to lighten. Classification, Category 7. And read the line 3 times, certain there had been some error in translation. They had evolved on a Category 2 world, a gentle planet of shallow seas and mild weather. Most council species came from Category 3 or Category 4 worlds. The highest classification N had ever seen in an applicant file was Category 5, and that species had required extensive genetic modification before they could safely interact with others. Category 7 was supposed to be theoretical, a classification reserved for worlds so hostile that sentient life could not possibly emerge. Worlds with extreme temperature variations, active geological instability, atmospheric toxins, and apex predators in every ecological niche. He kept reading. The species called themselves humans. They were bilateral, bipedal, and mammalian, which was common enough, but their evolutionary history was anything but common. They had developed as pursuit predators, the file explained, hunting their prey not through speed or strength but through endurance. They would chase an animal for hours, sometimes days, until it collapsed from exhaustion. Then they would kill it. And species had evolved as filter feeders. The concept of chasing something until it died from running was almost incomprehensible to him. The biological details grew more disturbing as he read. Humans could consume a vast range of organic compounds, including several that were toxic to most galactic species. They could survive dramatic temperature fluctuations, from well below the freezing point of water to temperatures that would cause heat stroke within minutes. Their skeletal structure was self-repairing, and the file noted with clinical detachment that human bones often grew back stronger after being broken. But it was the section on human neurochemistry that made him request an emergency recess. Humans possessed a biological system that responded to physical danger by flooding their bodies with a cocktail of chemicals. These chemicals temporarily suppressed pain, increased strength and speed, and enhanced reaction time. The file called this the fight-or-flight response, and noted that humans could consciously override it in either direction. They could force themselves to fight when every instinct screamed at them to run. They could force themselves to remain calm in situations that would cause most species to shut down entirely. The recess was granted, and made his way to a private chamber where several other senior had already gathered. He recognized representatives from the hegemony, the collective, and the assembly. None of them looked calm. "You've seen the file," said Mora of the. It was not a question. "The biology alone is concerning," and replied, "but I suspect there's more." Mora manipulated her terminal and projected a timeline onto the chamber's central display. It showed the technological progression of the human species, from their earliest use of tools to their development of faster-than-light travel, and studied the timeline in silence. Then he asked his assistant to verify the translation. "It's accurate, sir." "That's not possible. I've checked it 3 times. That had taken 11 million years to progress from controlled fire to nuclear fission. That had taken 8 million. The who were widely considered the most innovative species in the galaxy had managed it in just under 6 million years. Humans had done it in less than 300,000. "There must be an error," said from his delegation seat. "Perhaps they received outside assistance, a precursor cache or contact with an unregistered species." "Our preliminary scans found no evidence of outside influence," Mora replied. "Their technology is entirely indigenous. They developed it themselves. In 300,000 years. In 297,000 years, to be precise." The chamber fell silent, and found himself calculating the implications. If humans continued to advance at their current rate, they would surpass the technological level of the Council's most advanced species within a few thousand years. Within 10,000 years, they might possess capabilities beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. "What about their social development?" and asked, "their cultural history?" Mora's skin shifted to an even paler shade of gray. "I've only begun to review it, but what I've seen so far is concerning." She pulled up a series of images: cities burning, weapons that split atoms, ships that sank beneath dark waters while humans struggled in the freezing sea, and everywhere always humans fighting each other, fighting their environment, fighting against odds that should have been impossible. "They call these events wars," Mora explained. "They occur with startling regularity throughout human history. Sometimes they fight over resources, sometimes over territory, but often they fight over abstract concepts, ideas, beliefs, things that have no physical form at all." "All species have conflicts," pointed out. "It's a natural part of social development." "Not like this." Mora enlarged one of the images. It showed a mushroom cloud rising over a human city. "This weapon killed approximately 80,000 humans in a single instant. The humans who deployed it then built more of them, thousands more. They have enough of these weapons to destroy their entire planet several times over. And they've survived this long. They've had several close calls. Their file documents at least a dozen incidents where their civilization came within minutes of self-annihilation." Mora paused. "They keep building the weapons anyway," and leaned back in his seat and tried to process what he was hearing. A species from a species that could chase prey to death, that felt less pain when injured, that advanced faster than any civilization in galactic history. A species that built weapons capable of destroying worlds and then built more of them. And now that species had discovered faster-than-light travel, they were coming. "What do we do?" someone asked, and had no answer. In 300 years on the Council, he had helped guide dozens of new species into galactic civilization. He had seen aggressive species and passive ones, technological prodigies and slow developers, predators and prey. He had never seen anything like this. He looked around the chamber at his fellow. For the first time in centuries, He saw genuine fear in their eyes. "We need more information," he said finally. "Full analysis. Everything we can learn about this species before we make any decisions." Mora nodded. "I'll assemble a team, but I should warn you, the more I read about humans, the more frightened I become." And thought about the file on his terminal, the pursuit predators, the self-repairing bones, the chemicals that turned pain into power. "I know," he said quietly, "I know." The intelligence division of the Galactic Council occupied an entire level of Station Prime, hidden behind security protocols that even most didn't know existed. It was here, in chambers shielded against every known form of surveillance, that the real analysis of humanity began. Mora had assembled a team of 30 specialists drawn from 12 different species. Linguists worked alongside psychologists, historians alongside military strategists. Their task was simple in concept, but staggering in scope. Review every piece of information humanity had transmitted as part of their application, and compile a comprehensive assessment of the species' potential threat level. The humans, in a gesture of openness that seemed almost naive, had included thousands of hours of cultural material in their friendship package. Literature, music, visual recordings they called films, games they played for entertainment. The Council's analysts dove into this material with the dedication of scholars studying an ancient text. What they found kept them awake for weeks, and visited the intelligence level on the 5th day of the analysis, expecting to find a calm, professional operation. Instead, he found chaos. Analysts argued in small groups, their voices raised in fear or disbelief. Others sat alone at their terminals, staring at screens with expressions of shocked fascination. One young had apparently not moved from her station in 3 days. Mara met him at the entrance, her gray skin now almost white. "Thank you for coming. There are some things you need to see." She led him to a private viewing chamber and began pulling up files. "We started with their history. I thought the weapons were the worst of it. I was wrong." The first image showed a human in primitive armor, standing over a fallen enemy. The image itself was not unusual. Many species had martial traditions in their past, but Mora directed his attention to the text that accompanied the image. "This is from a conflict humans call the Punic Wars. When it ended, the victorious humans did something we don't have a word for in. They destroyed their enemies' cities completely. They killed or enslaved the entire population. And then they spread salt across the earth so nothing would ever grow there again. A standard conquest," and said, though his voice wavered. "It's not the conquest that disturbs me. It's the salt. They poisoned the land out of pure hatred. They wanted to ensure their enemies could never rise again, even in 1,000 years. We've been searching our databases. No other species in galactic history has done anything similar." She pulled up another file. "But that's not the worst part. Look at this." The document appeared to be some kind of human philosophical text, and struggled with the translation for a moment before his implant caught up. The concept it described was something called spite. "We can't find an equivalent in any galactic language," Mora explained. "The closest translation is harming yourself in order to harm your enemy more. But that doesn't capture the full meaning. Humans will accept pain, accept death, accept the destruction of everything they value, just to ensure their enemy suffers. They consider this a virtue." That's insane. By our standards, yes, but for humans it's so common they have dozens of words for it. Revenge, vengeance, payback, retribution. Mora's tendrils curled in distress. They write stories glorifying it. Their children are taught that it's honorable to hurt someone who hurt you, even if the retaliation costs you everything. And sat heavily in the nearest seat. He was beginning to understand why his analysts looked so disturbed. What else? Mora pulled up a series of images showing humans with various animals. Dogs, the file identified them. Wolves, large predators with sharp teeth and powerful jaws. These were one of the dominant predator species on their planet, Mora explained. Humans somehow convinced them to live alongside human settlements, to protect humans, to hunt with them. She paused. Some humans keep these animals in their homes. They sleep in the same rooms with them. They consider them family members. They domesticated an apex predator. They befriended an apex predator. The distinction matters. They didn't just breed the aggression out of them. They formed emotional bonds with creatures that could kill them easily, and the wolves accepted it. And thought about the relationship with the filter creatures of there, carefully maintained, strictly controlled. The idea of sleeping beside a predator made his skin crawl. There's more, Mora said, much more. But I want to show you something that I think illustrates the human psychological profile better than anything else we've found. She pulled up a recording. It showed humans strapping themselves into a primitive vehicle, a narrow cylinder mounted on top of what appeared to be a controlled explosive, and watched in growing horror as the explosive ignited and the vehicle rose into the sky, shaking violently, flames pouring from its base. This is how humans first reached space, Mora said. They sat on top of bombs and lit them. What was their failure rate? In the early days, approximately 30%. 30% of these missions failed. Sometimes more. They knew the odds. They went anyway. Mora zoomed in on the faces of the humans in the recording. They were smiling. Look at them. They're about to ride an explosion into the void of space, and they're happy about it. And studied the human faces for a long moment. He had lived for 500 years. He had seen many species, many cultures, many ways of approaching existence. He had never seen anything like the expression in those human eyes. It was joy, yes, but it was something else too. Something fierce and hungry and utterly without fear. There's a quote from one of their leaders, Mora said. I want to read it to you. She pulled up the text and began to translate. We choose to go to the moon not because it is easy, but because it is hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win. She let the words hang in the air for a moment. They don't just accept challenges, they seek them out. They specifically choose difficult paths because the difficulty itself is attractive to them. They want to struggle. They want to overcome. Mora's voice dropped to a whisper, and they have never in their entire history encountered an obstacle they were willing to accept as permanent. And closed his eyes. The implications were becoming clearer with every passing moment. A species that turned pain into power, that befriended predators, that strapped themselves to bombs for the joy of reaching somewhere new, that would poison the earth of their enemies out of spite. A species that never gave up. There's one more thing, Mora said. I saved it for last because I think it's the most important detail we've discovered. She pulled up a piece of human fiction. A story about a warrior who was struck down by an enemy and somehow became more powerful as a result. This isn't real, Mora explained. It's a story humans tell each other. The character says, if you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine. And here's what disturbs me most. This isn't treated as a paradox or a puzzle. Every human who encounters this story understands it immediately. They know exactly what it means. What does it mean? Mora was silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. It means that hurting humans makes them stronger. Not physically, perhaps, but in their will to fight, their capacity for revenge, their determination to win. She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. It means that the worst thing you can do to a human is give them a reason to hate you, because once they have that reason, they will never stop coming. And sat in the viewing chamber long after Mora left. He thought about the approach to conflict, the careful calculations of risk and reward, the willingness to accept unfavorable outcomes if the cost of fighting was too high. He had always thought this was wisdom. Now he wondered if it was simply the luxury of a species, that had never faced a true threat. The humans were coming. They wanted to join the galactic community to participate in the great experiment of interstellar civilization, and based on everything and had read, they seemed genuinely eager to do so. They had sent a friendship package. They had followed all the proper protocols. They appeared to be reaching out in good faith. But somewhere in the back of his ancient mind, and could not escape a simple calculation, if the humans ever decided the galaxy was their enemy, what would stop them? The answer, he realized with slowly dawning horror, was nothing. Nothing at all. The human diplomatic vessel Olive Branch emerged from faster-than-light travel at the exact coordinates in their acceptance message. Ambassador stood at the observation window of the bridge, watching the stars settle back into their normal positions as the ship's drive powered down. Somewhere out there, hidden in the darkness between worlds, was Station Prime, the ancient heart of the Galactic Council. She had prepared for this moment her entire life. 3 decades of diplomatic training, 7 years of learning every known galactic language, 5 years of studying the history and customs of every council species. She knew the proper greetings, the appropriate gestures of respect, the subtle signals that could make or break a first contact negotiation. What she did not know, as the Olive Branch began its approach to the station, was why the council had responded so quickly. Standard protocol called for a preliminary review period of at least 1 galactic year. Applications from new species were supposed to move through committees, subcommittees, working groups, and review boards. The process was designed to be slow, methodical, and thorough. Humanity's application had been approved in less than a month. Ambassador, we're receiving guidance signals from the station, the navigation officer reported. They're directing us to Docking Bay 1. Frowned, are you sure? Docking Bay 1 is reserved for heads of state. That's what they transmitted, ma'am. The Olive Branch followed the guidance signals through the station's outer defense perimeter, past squadrons of ships bearing the insignia of a dozen different species. Counted at least 50 vessels in formation around the station, more than she had seen in any recording of council activities. It looked like a military escort. We're being scanned, the sensor officer announced. Multiple frequencies, some of them are weapons targeting systems. Maintain course and speed, ordered. Don't give them any reason to worry. The docking procedure was smooth and professional. The Olive Branch settled into its assigned bay, and the station's umbilicals connected with soft clicks. Gathered her diplomatic team and made her way to the airlock, pausing only to straighten her uniform and take a single deep breath. The airlock opened. Stepped forward, her translator implant humming softly against her temple, ready to convert the first words of galactic greeting into something she could understand. She was not prepared for what she saw. The docking bay was filled with beings, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, representing every species she had studied, and several she had never seen before. They stood in perfect formation, arranged by species and rank, their attention focused on the small human delegation emerging from the ship. Some carried banners bearing symbols recognized as marks of honor. Others held instruments that her briefings had identified as ceremonial weapons, carried only in the presence of the most distinguished visitors. At the front of the assembly stood a group of figures wearing the elaborate robes of council senior leadership. One of them, a tall being whose blue skin rippled with complex patterns, stepped forward and performed a greeting gesture so elaborate that its translator needed several seconds to process its full meaning. Ambassador of Earth, the being said, I am an of the delegation. On behalf of the entire Galactic Council, I welcome humanity to our community of worlds. Returned the greeting with the appropriate human equivalent, a slight bow with hands clasped in front of her. Thank you. Humanity is honored by this reception. And skin flickered through several colors that's translator identified as complex emotional states, nervousness, determination, and something that looked almost like fear. "Please," and said, gesturing toward a waiting transport. "The full council has assembled to meet you." The transport carried the human delegation through the station's interior, past viewing windows that revealed the staggering scale of the structure. Had studied recordings of Station Prime, but nothing had prepared her for the reality. The station was larger than some moons, a city in space that had been growing and evolving for millions of years. It was beautiful in its way, beautiful and very, very old. The transport finally stopped at a massive doorway marked with symbols that Translator identified as the entrance to the Grand Chamber. She had expected to see this room eventually, perhaps after weeks of preliminary meetings and protocol sessions. She had not expected to see it on her first day. The doors opened, stepped through and felt her heart skip. Every seat was filled. In 3 centuries of galactic history, the full council had assembled only a handful of times. For the signing of the Great Peace, for the response to the extinction event of 442b, for the trial of the last hegemonic warlord, events of galactic significance, moments that would be remembered for millions of years. And now for the arrival of humanity. Made her way to the speaking platform at the center of the chamber, acutely aware of the thousands of eyes watching her every movement. She took her position and waited, her diplomatic training keeping her face calm even as her mind raced to understand what was happening. And approached the podium. He seemed to struggle for a moment with his words, his skin shifting through a complex sequence of colors before finally settling on a pale gray. "Humanity," he announced, his voice amplified to reach every corner of the vast chamber, "has been granted full membership status in the Galactic Council, effective immediately." A murmur ran through the assembled delegates. His translator picked up fragments of a dozen languages, all expressing variations of the same sentiment: surprise, concern, and something that sounded remarkably like relief. Furthermore, and continued, humanity will receive priority access to all Council resources, including complete technology exchanges and defensive coordination. The 7th Fleet will be repositioned to your system's edge for your protection. Had been trained to maintain composure in any diplomatic situation. She had practiced responses to offers, counteroffers, threats, and insults. She had prepared for success and failure in equal measure. She had not prepared for this. She said carefully, "Humanity is grateful for this reception, but I must admit some confusion. We expected a preliminary review process. We expected negotiations. We expected—" She paused, searching for the right word. "We expected to have to prove ourselves." A long silence fell over the chamber, and exchanged glances with several other senior. Finally, an elderly member of a species didn't recognize rose from his seat and made his way to the speaking platform. "Ambassador," he said, his voice thin with age but steady with conviction, "we have read your file, your history, your literature, your capacity for—" He paused, and his translator emitted a word that did not quite render in human terms. The closest approximation was something like sustained conflict escalation. "The Council has decided, unanimously, that humanity should have absolutely no reason to be unhappy with us." Stared at the ancient being, understanding slowly dawning. "You're afraid of us." "Yes," the said simply, "we are." Before could respond, and was speaking again, running through a list of provisions that seemed to grow more generous with each item. Trade agreements overwhelmingly favorable to humanity. Territorial concessions in 3 separate sectors. A permanent seat on the Security Council, despite humanity's status as a new species. Research partnerships with the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. Listened in growing disbelief. In her entire diplomatic career, she had never seen anything like this. The galaxy's oldest and most powerful civilizations were falling over themselves to give humanity everything it could want, and more. The session concluded with the formal signing of membership documents, a ceremony that should have taken weeks but was compressed into a single afternoon, smiled and nodded and performed the appropriate gestures of gratitude, all while her mind worked furiously to process what had happened. When she finally returned to the olive branch, her team was waiting with questions written on their faces. The communications officer, a young woman named Tors, spoke first. "Ambassador, what happened in there?" Considered the question for a long moment. She thought about the reading she had done on the journey to Station Prime, the analyses of galactic history, the discussions of how species interacted, competed, and sometimes destroyed each other. She thought about the category of humanities, the length of human history, the countless wars and struggles and triumphs that had brought them to this moment. "They're scared of us," she said finally. Tors frowned. "Why? We're the newcomers. We're the ones who don't know anything. They've read our history. They know what we're capable of." Moved to the observation window and looked out at Station Prime, at the fleets of ships maintaining their careful distance, at the ancient structure that had witnessed the rise and fall of 1,000 civilizations. They know that we never give up, that we turn pain into strength, that we pursue our enemies across generations if we have to. She turned back to her team. They know that if they gave us a reason to fight them, we would never stop, and they've decided it's better to be our friends than our enemies. Tors processed this for a moment. "So what do we do?" Thought about the Council's offer, the resources, the technology, the opportunities that had just been handed to humanity on a golden platter. She thought about what her species could do with those gifts, how fast they could grow, how powerful they could become. She thought about all the species out there in the galaxy who had looked at humanity's file and seen not a primitive newcomer, but a force of nature, a storm on the horizon, something to be appeased rather than confronted. "We take what they're offering," said. "We learn everything they can teach us. We grow stronger, and we remember always the lesson they've just taught us." "What lesson is that?" Smiled, and for just a moment, she felt the weight of all human history behind her. The hunters who had chased prey across endless plains, the warriors who had fought against impossible odds, the explorers who had crossed oceans and climbed mountains and strapped themselves to rockets for the simple joy of reaching somewhere new. "The lesson," she said, "is that the galaxy already knows what we are. They've seen what we've done to survive. They've read about our wars and our struggles and our refusal to ever accept defeat. And they've decided wisely that they never want to be on the wrong side of our determination." She turned back to the observation window. Somewhere out there, beyond the station and the fleets and the careful diplomatic protocols, lay a galaxy full of wonders waiting to be discovered. A galaxy that had just opened its doors to humanity, not out of generosity, but out of fear. "We're going to do amazing things out there," said quietly. "We're going to learn and grow and explore and build, and the whole time they'll be watching us, wondering if they made the right choice." The captain of the olive branch had been standing in the doorway, listening. Now he stepped forward, his face thoughtful. "And if they decide they made the wrong choice?" Thought about the human capacity for spite, for vengeance, for sustained conflict escalation that never ended until one side was utterly destroyed. She thought about the salt on the fields of Carthage and the mushroom clouds over Hiroshima and the wolves that humans had turned into family. "Then they'll learn," she said, "what we already know." "What's that?" Watched the stars through the observation window, ancient suns that had burned for billions of years, and felt a fierce pride in everything her species had overcome to reach this moment. "That striking us down only makes us stronger," she said, "and that no one in all the history of our species has ever won a war against human determination." The olive branch began its journey back to Earth, carrying news of humanity's acceptance into the galactic community. Behind it, the Council watched and waited and hoped that they had made the right decision. Only time would tell.